an agenda. I sometimes go to the studio and write on the floor, you know.
Eric Clapton's long and impressive career as a musician, there is a history of nasty battles. Some harsh words and famous fights that have changed rock history in the past. I've thought, I've got to pack this in because it's lonely, whether it was because I was angry or held a grudge for decades. Clapton's relationships with other rock stars show that he is a complicated and moody person, not just like his soulful guitar riffs. Today we're going to look at the bad side of rock royalty as we name the top 6 rock stars. Eric Clapton felt the worst about it. It's not hard, but I've always been afraid to do it because I don't think I had a good enough reason. It wasn't just arguments over work, there was real anger that could be heard in recording studios, concert halls, and throughout music history. You may think you know Clapton from hits like Layla and Tears in Heaven, but what you're about to hear will change the way you think about the 3-time Rock and Roll Hall of Famer forever. From guitar gods who tried to take away his power to bandmates who pushed him to the limit, turn up the music and settle in as we reveal the nasty battles, behind-the-scenes drama, and explosive fights that even the biggest Clapton fans don't know about. Begins now. Number Phil Collins. 6. Phil Collins is 6th on our list of famous people who had fights. These fights shocked the music world in the 1980s. Phil Collins vs. Eric Clapton. This feud is especially interesting because it started with the two of them working together. Collins played drums on Clapton's 1985 album Behind the Sun and even produced a few tracks. There was a storm of musical debate going on behind those studio sessions. Clapton, the blues purist, was said to hate the pop direction. Collins was guiding him in the same direction that Collins was taking Genesis and his solo career to huge commercial success. I felt like I was being packaged, Clapton is said to have told a close friend. Phil wanted to turn me into some kind of pop act and that's not who I am, never was, and never will be. Live Aid in 1985 was the most tense time. What people watching at home didn't see were the heated fights going on backstage about the set list and style of music. Clapton wanted raw blues power. Industry sources say Collins pushed for radio-friendly arrangements that would appeal to people all over the world. Clapton would later call this time, "selling my soul," because his commercial success hurt the reputation of his blues music, while Collins became a worldwide superstar on the 80s pop wave. Clapton went back to building his blues roots. Their relationship got worse when Collins used pop-oriented production techniques on Clapton's work and got mixed reviews from reviewers. Many blues purists said Clapton had given up his roots for chart success. This rivalry was very important because it showed the old fight between making money and being true to your art, which is still going on in the music business today. Number 5. Ginger Baker. Ginger Baker. Eric Clapton's explosive relationship with famous drummer Ginger Baker comes in at number 5 on our list. If you thought band breakups were usually clean and professional, think again. The Cream saga will change your mind for good. Cream was one of rock's first supergroups, but Clapton and Baker didn't get along from the start. Their fights behind the scenes became legendary, and Clapton is said to have told a roadie, "Either he goes or I go." In a rare interview before a big show, Robert Stigwood, who used to run Cream Road, said, "It wasn't just musical differences, they literally couldn't stand being in the same room." Eric thought Ginger was unstable and impossible to work with, and Ginger thought Eric was changing their sound to make it more commercial. Things got really tense during their farewell tour in 1968, when witnesses said they barely acknowledged each other on stage. In the recording studio, they often asked to record their parts separately to avoid interacting with each other. Their intense dislike was made worse by the fact that they made some of rock's most famous music together. The creative tension led to masterpieces, but it hurt their relationship. Baker later said, "Eric was scared of me because he knew I was the better musician." Clapton supposedly responded by saying he wouldn't be a part of any Cream reunion if Baker was involved. He reportedly stuck to this stance for decades until they had a brief reunion in 2005, which sources said was at best professional. The Clapton-Baker fight shows how personal problems can feed artistic genius and destroy it in the end. Fourth, a pattern we've seen over and over again in rock history. Frank Zappa. Finally, Frank Zappa falling into number 4 is a fight between two very different musical styles, Eric Clapton and the avant-garde genius Frank Zappa. It wasn't just a dislike on their part. It was a full-on ideological war over music that was talked about in interviews, concerts, and record liner notes. In a famous interview with Rolling Stone in 1978, Frank Zappa, who was known for his experimental and satirical music, made it clear that he didn't like what he called Clapton's predictable blues doodles. Zapp said, "Eric Clapton is a safe guitar player, he plays the same thing over and over again, there's no danger, no risk, no art." Clapton was angry about these comments and replied through friends who worked as music journalists, "Frank Zappa wouldn't know real music if it bit him. All his experiments are just noise, hiding the fact that he can't play real rock and roll." Things got really heated at the 1969 Love and Peace Festival, where both artists were performing. Sources close to the production say Zappa planned his experimental set to happen right after Clapton's more traditional blues set, telling staff, "Let's see him follow that." People who worked in the music business remember how Zappa would make fun of Clapton's guitar solos in interviews by calling them predictable pentatonic exercises. Clapton, on the other hand, thought Zappa's work was pretentious and unlistenable. Their musical feud showed a bigger divide in rock music, the traditionalists versus the experimentalists. Clapton clung to the authenticity of blues music while Zappa pushed the limits. This led to a mutual dislike that lasted for decades, even after Zappa's death in 1993. Clapton refused to speak publicly, reportedly telling friends, "I have nothing to say about him that wouldn't be inappropriate." Mike Richards. 3. Mike Richards. The famous feud between Eric Clapton and the Rolling Stones comes in third place on our list of things people hate. Their fight with Keith Richards was so personal that it involved love triangles, betrayals, and years of public sniping. They started to dislike each other when Clapton publicly stole Pattie Boyd from his best friend George Harrison. Richards spoke out against the move, calling it a snake move that showed Clapton's real nature. But that was just the start. As guitarists, their styles couldn't have been more different. Clapton, the technical blues master, is said to have made fun of Richards' sloppy playing style during studio sessions. In response, Richards called Clapton boring and predictable in a number of interviews. The public fight started in the mid-1970s, when both were struggling with drug abuse. Richards accused Clapton of hiding behind heroin while he dealt with the music business, and Clapton replied that Richards had been playing the same 5 riffs for 20 years. When Clapton launched his successful albums in the late 1970s, they became professional rivals. Richards is said to have told the band members, "Anyone can play slow, Eric just hasn't figured that out yet." Clapton responded by refusing to work with Richards on any project. Insiders in the music business said that even their common friends had to plan separate events so as not to put them in the same room. The tension was so high that record labels didn't want to put them together on compilation or tribute albums. Not only was there competition at work, but there was also rivalry in personal areas, from lost loves to musical ideas. In rock and roll, Clapton and Richards stood for everything the other hated. The legendary guitar rivalry that defined an era was between Eric Clapton and Jimmy Page. It wasn't just a competition, it was a fight to be named Britain's best guitarist. Their feud started when they were both session musicians in London in the early 1960s. Page, who was already making waves with his innovative studio techniques, reportedly made fun of Clapton's one-dimensional blues style during recording sessions, telling producers, "Eric needs to broaden his horizons." When Page formed Led Zeppelin and Clapton joined Cream, the rivalry between the two bands erupted. At the time, music journalists said that Clapton would privately see whenever. Page's technical skills were praised, and a studio engineer remembers Clapton saying, "Jimmy hides behind studio tricks, let's see him play that live." The tension was at its highest when both bands played at festivals. Page's stage appearance was more theatrical and occult, while Clapton's was more blues-oriented. The British press made things worse by constantly comparing them to Clapton, who is said to have refused to read any story about Page's relationship with the former Yardbirds bassist. Paul Samuel Smith said that Eric couldn't handle it when Jimi took the Yardbirds and made something bigger than what he had done with them. It ate at him. What made this feud so nasty was that Page seemed to be more successful than Clapton in the business world, while Clapton's innovations overshadowed Page's work, creating what insiders called an inferiority complex that lasted decades. Even in interviews decades later, Clapton subtly criticized Page's playing style, while Page called Clapton stuck in the past. Their rivalry was a classic example of the clash between technical mastery and commercial innovation. Jimi Hendrix versus Jimi Hendrix is the most famous guitar battle in rock history, and it's also the #1 thing on our list. This wasn't just hatred, it was a crisis of identity that shook Clapton to his core. It all started in 1966, when Clapton was known as God among British guitarists. Then Hendrix came to London, and everything changed. Clapton went to Hendrix's first show in London and was reportedly devastated. Witnesses say they saw him leave the venue with a white face and muttering, "It's over, I'm done." In October 1966, there was a famous jam session at a London club that became legendary because Hendrix blew up the stage with new techniques. Before leaving the stage, Clapton reportedly said, "You never told me he was that bloody good." This showed a mix of admiration and defeat. From that night on, Clapton's relationship with Hendrix was marked by intense professional jealousy. Pete Tonine recalls, "Eric couldn't handle having his throne taken away, he went from being slowhand to second-hand overnight." Clapton reportedly refused to attend Hendrix concerts and would change radio stations whenever Hendrix songs played. In private conversations, he reportedly said that Hendrix had ruined guitar for everyone by opening up so many new possibilities. Eric was crazy about Hendrix. He would study his skills and then trash them in public, all while trying to use them in his own playing behind closed doors. The worst part was that when Hendrix died in 1970, Clapton apparently wouldn't say anything in public, but later said in interviews that he felt relieved, which showed how deeply he felt about things. This wasn't just professional rivalry, it was the dethroning of a guitar god by someone who rewrote the rules of the instrument. Clapton's hatred for Hendrix masked deep admiration and the painful recognition that he'd been surpassed. And there you have it, the top 6 rock stars that Eric Clapton couldn't stand. From guitar god rivalries to ideological battles, these feuds show us that sometimes the greatest music comes from the most intense personal conflicts. These relationships weren't just backstage drama, they shaped the course of rock and roll, pushed musicians to evolve, and created some of the most explosive creative tensions in music history. Whether it was Hendrix's revolutionary playing that dethroned Clapton or his bitter battles with bandmates that fueled some of most passionate music, hatred and rivalry seemed to follow the legendary guitarist throughout his career. What do you think about these controversial rivalries? Which of these rock rivalries surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments, and feel free to add your own stories if you've heard any crazy ones about Clapton's tough times.